The 911 call crackled through the dispatch radio at 6:47 p.m. on a quiet Sunday evening. There's a trespasser at Lake Pine Estates who refuses to leave. He's aggressive and threatening. I need police here immediately. What the caller didn't know was that the man she was trying to have arrested was Detective Marcus Rodriguez of the state police, and he was about to turn her world upside down. Detective Marcus Rodriguez had dreamed of this moment for 15 years. After countless overtime shifts, missed family dinners, and dangerous undercover operations, he had finally saved enough to purchase his sanctuary and modest lakefront cabin. Nestled in the prestigious Lake Pine Estates community, the 1,200 square foot retreat sat on 2 acres of pristine waterfront property, complete with a private dock and breathtaking sunset views that stretched across the entire lake. Marcus had discovered the property through a close friend in real estate who knew about his dream of owning lakefront property. The price was steep for $185,000, but Marcus had been methodical in his savings, putting away nearly 40% of his detective salary for over a decade. The closing had gone smoothly in March, and Marcus spent his weekends that spring renovating the cabin himself, installing new windows, refinishing the hardwood floors, and building a small deck extension. The Lake Pine Estates Homeowners Association had seemed welcoming initially. The community boasted 127 properties, mostly weekend retreats for affluent professionals from the city. The HOA dues were reasonable at $200 monthly, and the covenant seemed standard, maintaining property appearance, noise restrictions after 10 p.m., and approval required for major exterior modifications. Marcus's first encounter with Patricia Whitman, the HOA president, occurred in late April. She was a sharp-featured woman, in her early 60s, impeccably dressed even for casual neighborhood encounters, with steel gray hair pulled into a tight bun. Patricia approached Marcus while he was staining his deck one Saturday morning. "You must be the new owner," she said, her tone cordial but assessing. "I'm Patricia Whitman, HOA president. I wanted to welcome you to Lake Pine Estates personally, Marcus." While abstaining from his hands and extended a friendly greeting, Detective Marcus Rodriguez, "Thanks for the welcome. Beautiful community you have here." Patricia's smile faltered slightly at the mention of his profession. "Detective? How interesting. What department?" "State Police. Been with them for 12 years now." Something shifted in Patricia's demeanor, though Marcus couldn't pinpoint exactly what. She recovered quickly, discussing community guidelines and upcoming social events. But Marcus noticed her gaze lingering on his modest pickup truck, and work closed with what seemed like disapproval. Over the following months, Marcus began receiving increasingly nitpicky violation notices from the HOA. His truck was too commercial looking for overnight parking. His outdoor furniture didn't meet aesthetic standards. The small boat he kept on his dock was improperly positioned. Each violation came with threats of fines ranging from $100 to $500. Marcus complied with each request, despite finding them petty and seemingly targeted. He bought a new truck, replaced his perfectly functional patio furniture with expensive teak pieces, and adjusted his boat's positioning multiple times. Other neighbors quietly confided that they'd never seen such aggressive enforcement, especially not on properties far more luxurious than Marcus's modest cabin. The situation escalated dramatically in September. Marcus had invited his extended family for a Labor Day weekend, gathering his parents to siblings, their children, and a few close friends from the force. The group totaled 12 people, well within the guest limits outlined in the HOA covenants. They grilled burgers, played volleyball on the beach, and enjoyed the lake until sunset, keeping noise levels respectful and cleaning up meticulously on Tuesday morning. Marcus found a certified letter waiting at his city apartment, a formal HOA violation notice claiming he had hosted an unauthorized commercial gathering and violated noise ordinances. The fine was $2,500, with a demand for immediate payment and a threat to place a lien on his property if unpaid within 30 days. Marcus was furious but maintained his professionalism. He requested a hearing before the whole board, gathered witness statements from neighbors who confirmed there had been no noise violations, and prepared a detailed defense of his rights as a property owner. The hearing, held in the community clubhouse on a rainy October evening, was a kangaroo court. Patricia Whitman presided over for other board members, all of whom seemed to have already made their decision. They dismissed Marcus as evidence, ignored neighbor testimony supporting him, and upheld the fine with an additional $500 penalty for wasting the board's time with frivolous appeals. Detective Rodriguez, Patricia said, her voice dripping with condescension, perhaps Lake Pine Estates simply isn't the right fit for someone of your background. Have you considered that there are communities better suited to your lifestyle? The racial undertones were unmistakable, but Marcus kept his composure. Mrs. Whitman, I purchased this property legally, and I have every right to enjoy it within the established guidelines. I violated nothing. The board has spoken. Patricia replied coldly, pay the fine, or we'll proceed with a lien. Marcus left that meeting knowing he was in a fight, but he had no idea how far Patricia Whitman was willing to go. 3 weeks later, on that fateful Sunday evening in November, Marcus was relaxing on his deck with a beer, watching the sunset after a particularly difficult week of investigating a child abuse case. At 6:45 p.m., the county sheriff's deputies knocked on his door. Sir, we've received a complaint about trespassing. We need to see some identification and proof you have a right to be on this property. As Marcus reached for his wallet, his detective instincts kicked in. Someone had called the police on him at his own legally purchased property, and he had a pretty good idea who. The game was about to change completely. The two sheriff's deputies, Officer Jonna Mills and Sergeant Tom Bradley, stood awkwardly on Marcus's deck as he presented his driver's license, property deed, and state police identification. The sunset cast long shadows across the lake, but the tension in the air was palpable. Detective Rodriguez, Sergeant Bradley said, clearly uncomfortable, we're really sorry about this. The caller was very insistent that you were trespassing, claimed you were threatening her and refusing to leave private property. Marcus's jaw tightened. What exactly did she tell you? Officer Mills consulted her notes. Patricia Whitman, HOA president. She said you've been harassing residents, that you don't belong in this community, and that you became aggressive when she asked you to leave. She seemed genuinely frightened. The lies hit Marcus like physical blows. In 12 years of police work, he'd seen plenty of false accusations, but being on the receiving end felt entirely different. Officers, I own this property. I've been sitting on my own deck for the past hour, alone, having a beer. I haven't spoken to Mrs. Whitman or anyone else today. Sergeant Bradley examined the property deed carefully. Everything looks legitimate to us. Detective, we'll file a report stating no crime occurred. You might want to consider getting cameras. Installed situations like this can escalate. After the deputies left, Marcus sat in his kitchen, mind racing. Patricia Whitman had crossed the line, filing a false police report to harass him. As a detective, he knew this was just the beginning. People who were willing to lie to police rarely stopped there. Marcus spent the sleepless night developing a strategy. By Monday morning, He had installed a comprehensive security system for exterior cameras covering all approaches to his property, motion sensors, and audio recording capabilities. If Patricia wanted to play games, he'd be ready. His lawyer, Sandra Chen, listened grimly to Marcus's account during their Tuesday meeting. Sandra had handled several HOA disputes and recognized the pattern immediately. Marcus, what you're describing sounds like targeted harassment with possible discriminatory motives. The escalation to false police reports is concerning. We need to document everything and consider filing a restraining order. I want to know what legal recourse I have, Marcus replied. She's trying to force me out of my own property through intimidation. Sandra spread Patricia's correspondence across her desk. Looking at these violation notices, the pattern is clear. She's applying rules selectively and interpreting covenants in ways that specifically target you. The false 911 call was criminal filing. A false police report is a misdemeanor. Over the following 2 weeks, Marcus's security system captured exactly what he expected. Patricia Whitman made daily walks past his property, often stopping to photograph his truck, his boat, even his garbage cans. She spoke extensively on her phone during these surveillance walks, gesturing toward his cabin with obvious agitation. The breakthrough came on a Wednesday evening. Marcus was reviewing security footage when he noticed Patricia approaching his property line with another woman, Eleanor Hayes, another HOA board member. His audio system picked up their conversation clearly. I don't care what it takes. Patricia's voice carried clearly in the crisp November air. He doesn't belong here. These people think they can just buy their way into decent neighborhoods and bring their kind of problems with them. Eleanor's response chilled Marcus to the bone. What about the lien threat? Can we actually force a foreclosure? My lawyer says if we stack enough violations, we can make his legal costs so expensive, he'll have to sell. And if he doesn't pay the fines, we can foreclose within 6 months. I've done it before. Marcus saved the recording immediately and called Sandra Chen. I've got them on tape discussing the conspiracy to force me out through fraudulent violations. Sandra's excitement was palpable. Marcus, this is exactly what we needed. Conspiracy to commit fraud, civil rights violations under the Fair Housing Act, and now we have evidence of a pattern. We're filing both criminal complaints and a federal civil rights lawsuit. The next phase of Marcus's plan required patience and precision. He began documenting every interaction, every violation notice, every HOA communication. His detective training served him well. He treated this like building a case against organized crime, because that's essentially what it was. Marcus also discovered that Patricia's harassment wasn't limited to him. Through careful neighborhood conversations, he learned that the Johnsons, an elderly black couple, had faced similar harassment until they sold their property at a loss the previous year. The Hernandez family had endured months of violations before relocating. Patricia Whitman wasn't just targeting Marcus, she was systematically pushing out anyone who didn't fit her vision of Lake Pine Estates. The most damaging evidence came from an unexpected source. Marcus's next-door neighbor, retired teacher Margaret Foster, had grown disgusted with Patricia's behavior. Margaret had been secretly documenting HOA meetings and Patricia's comments for months. Detective Rodriguez, Margaret said during a discreet coffee meeting, I've lived here for 8 years, and I've watched Patricia drive out 5 families. She always finds ways to make their lives miserable until they leave. What she's doing to you is the worst I've seen. Margaret handed Marcus a manila folder containing meeting minutes, email printouts, and handwritten notes detailing Patricia's discriminatory statements during HOA meetings. The evidence was damning. Patricia had repeatedly made comments about maintaining neighborhood standards and keeping out undesirable elements. Armed with surveillance footage, audio recordings, witness statements, and documented evidence of a discriminatory pattern, Marcus and Sandra prepared their counterattack. They filed criminal complaints against Patricia for filing false police reports, conspiracy to commit fraud, and civil rights violations. The federal civil rights lawsuit sought $500, $0 in damages, and an injunction preventing further harassment. Sandra also filed complaints with the State Attorney General's office and the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Marcus had transformed from victim to prosecutor, but Patricia Whitman wasn't finished fighting. Her next move would be her most desperate and most dangerous. The court date was set for December 15th, just 4 weeks away. Marcus had no idea that Patricia was planning something that would turn their legal battle into a criminal case that would shock the entire community. The Hamilton County Courthouse buzzed with unusual activity on the morning of December 15th. Word had spread throughout Lake Pine Estates about the civil rights lawsuit that would determine not just Marcus Rodriguez's fate, but potentially expose years of systematic discrimination by the HOA board. Judge Margaret Sullivan, a 20-year veteran of civil rights cases, took her seat promptly at 9 a.m. The courtroom was packed. Neighbors from Lake Pine Estates filled the gallery. Local media representatives scribbled notes, and several off-duty police officers had come to support Marcus. Patricia Whitman sat at the defendant's table with her attorney, Robert Kellerman, a sharply dressed corporate lawyer known for aggressive tactics. She appeared confident, even smug, occasionally whispering comments that made Kellerman nod approvingly. Sandra Chan had prepared meticulously for this moment. Her opening statement painted a clear picture of systematic harassment disguised as HOA enforcement. Your Honor, what we have here is not a simple property dispute. This is a calculated campaign of discrimination designed to force Detective Rodriguez from his legally purchased property through fraudulent violations, escalating harassment, and ultimately false criminal accusations. Sandra's first evidence presentation was devastating. The security footage showed Patricia's daily surveillance walks, her photographing Marcus's property, and her animated phone conversations while staring at his cabin. When the audio recording played Patricia's conversation with Eleanor Hayes about these people and their plan to stack violations until Marcus couldn't afford to fight, several jurors visibly reacted. Kellerman objected repeatedly, arguing the recordings were illegally obtained, but Judge Sullivan ruled them admissible since they were recorded on Marcus's own property. Marcus took the stand at 10:30 a.m., his testimony methodical and professional. He detailed each violation notice, the escalating fines, the obvious selective enforcement, and the emotional toll of being treated like a criminal in his own community. Detective Rodriguez, Sandra asked, "How did it feel when those sheriff's deputies knocked on your door that evening?" Marcus's voice remained steady, but his pain was evident. "In 12 years of police work, I've never been on the receiving end of a false accusation. To have someone look those officers in the eye and lie about me being a trespasser on my own property was devastating." Kellerman's cross-examination was brutal, but ineffective. He attempted to portray Marcus as an aggressive officer who intimidated his neighbors, while Marcus's calm professionalism and the lack of any supporting evidence made these attacks fall flat. "Detective Rodriguez, isn't it true that your occupation makes some residents uncomfortable? That your police presence disrupts the peaceful nature of Lake Pine Estates?" Marcus's response was perfect. "Counselor, I'm not on duty when I'm at my cabin. I'm just a homeowner who wants to enjoy his property peacefully like any other resident. The afternoon session brought Marcus's neighbor witnesses. Margaret Foster's testimony was particularly damaging to Patricia's case. She presented her detailed documentation of home meetings, including Patricia's recorded comments about maintaining neighborhood character and preventing demographic changes. Mrs. Foster, Sandra asked, in your 8 years at Lake Pine Estates, have you seen this level of violation enforcement against other residents? Never, Margaret replied firmly. Mrs. Whitman has targeted Detective Rodriguez from day one. I've watched her walk past his property daily, taking pictures, making phone calls. It's harassment, plain and simple. Eleanor Hayes, called as a witness for Patricia's defense, proved to be a disaster for their case. Under Sandra's cross-examination, she became flustered and inadvertently confirmed key elements of the conspiracy. Mrs. Hayes, you were present during HOA board discussions about Detective Rodriguez's property. Correct. Yes. But we were just enforcing community standards that apparently don't apply to other residents. Can you explain why Mr. Peterson's boat dock violations were never addressed, while Detective Rodriguez received multiple citations for identical issues? Eleanor's inability to answer exposed the selective enforcement pattern clearly. But the day's most shocking moment came when Patricia took the stand in her own defense. Kellerman had clearly coached her to appear reasonable and community-minded, but Sandra's cross-examination quickly revealed her true nature. Mrs. Whitman, you testified that Detective Rodriguez made you feel unsafe. Can you provide specific examples of threatening behavior? He has a very intimidating presence. The way he looks at people, his police background, it makes residents uncomfortable. So his crime was existing while being a police officer? That's not what I said. Sandra pressed harder. Mrs. Whitman, let's talk about your 911 call. You told dispatch that Detective Rodriguez was trespassing and had become aggressive. When you asked him to leave, was any part of that statement true? Patricia's composure cracked. I believe he was trespassing at the time, and Mrs. Whitman, you knew he owned that property. You had personally served him violation notices at that address for months. How could you believe he was trespassing? The courtroom fell silent as Patricia stammered, unable to provide a coherent explanation. But Sandra wasn't finished. She produced a document that made Patricia's face go white, a copy of Patricia's personal journal, obtained through discovery, containing entries that revealed the true scope of her discriminatory campaign. Mrs. Whitman, please read this journal entry dated September 10th, the day after Detective Rodriguez's family gathering. Patricia's voice shook as she read. The Mexican cop had his entire gang over today. These people have no respect for property values. I need to find a way to make him understand he doesn't belong here. The racial slur and clear discriminatory intent hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Several jurors looked disgusted. Patricia's own attorney appeared stunned. This evidence had apparently been kept from him. Judge Sullivan called a brief recess, but the damage was done. Patricia Whitman had exposed herself as exactly what Marcus and Sandra had claimed: a racist, using her HOA position to systematically exclude minorities from her community. As court resumed for closing arguments, Marcus felt cautiously optimistic, but he had no idea that Patricia Whitman had one final, desperate card to play, one that would transform this civil case into criminal charges and put her freedom on the line. The verdict would have to wait until tomorrow, but Patricia's reaction to the journal revelation suggested she was planning something drastic. Judge Sullivan reconvened court at 9 a.m. on December 16th for closing arguments and her verdict. The courtroom atmosphere was electric with anticipation. But Marcus noticed immediately that Patricia Whitman looked different, disheveled, with dark circles under her eyes and a manic energy that set off his detective instincts. Sandra Chen's closing argument was masterful, weaving together the evidence into an irrefutable narrative of systematic discrimination. She highlighted the audio recordings, the selective enforcement patterns, the false police report, and most damaging of all, Patricia's own journal entries revealing her racist motivations. Your Honor, this case represents everything the Fair Housing Act was designed to prevent. Mrs. Whitman used her position of authority to target Detective Rodriguez based on his race and profession, employing increasingly desperate tactics to force him from his legally purchased property. The evidence is overwhelming and undeniable. Robert Kellerman's closing was notably brief and defensive. Patricia's journal revelations had devastated his case, and his attempts to portray her actions as legitimate HOA enforcement rang hollow. After her racist entries were read in open court, Judge Sullivan didn't need long to deliberate. At 11:15 a.m., she returned with her verdict. In the matter of Rodriguez v. Whitman and Lake Pine Estates HOA, this court finds overwhelming evidence of discriminatory harassment, conspiracy to violate civil rights, and filing false police reports. Mrs. Whitman's own documented words reveal a pattern of racial animus that violates both federal fair housing laws and basic human decency. The judge's voice carried both authority and disgust. I am awarding Detective Rodriguez for $185, zero in compensatory damages, the full purchase price of his property plus $100, zero in punitive damages. Additionally, I am issuing a permanent restraining order preventing Mrs. Whitman from any contact with Detective Rodriguez or his property. The courtroom erupted in murmurs of satisfaction from Marcus's supporters. But Judge Sullivan wasn't finished. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution of Mrs. Whitman for filing false police reports, conspiracy to commit fraud, and civil rights violations. Patricia Whitman's face went chalk white. She whispered frantically to her attorney, who shook his head repeatedly, clearly trying to calm her down. Marcus felt vindicated, but noticed Patricia's increasingly agitated behavior as court adjourned. His detective instincts screamed danger. Those instincts proved correct at 2:30 p.m. As Marcus was celebrating with Sandra and his family at a local restaurant, his phone rang. It was Sergeant Bradley from the Sheriff's Department. Detective Rodriguez, we have a situation at Lake Pine Estates. Patricia Whitman has barricaded herself in the whole clubhouse with what appears to be gasoline, and is threatening to burn it down. She's demanding to speak with you. Marcus's blood ran cold. I'll be right there. The scene at Lake Pine Estates was chaos. Fire trucks, police cars, and an ambulance lined the normally quiet streets. The clubhouse was surrounded by law enforcement, and Marcus could see Patricia through the windows, pacing frantically with what appeared to be a gas can. Captain Rodriguez of the Sheriff's Department filled Marcus in quickly. She showed up here an hour ago, completely unhinged, saying the court decision was illegitimate and that she wouldn't let those people destroy her community. She's poured gasoline throughout the building and has a lighter. Marcus approached the negotiation team. Let me talk to her. This whole situation is about me. Maybe I can get her to surrender. Through a megaphone, Marcus called out to Patricia. Mrs. Whitman, this is Detective Rodriguez. I'd like to talk with you. Patricia appeared at the window, her face contorted with rage and desperation. You've destroyed everything, she screamed. This was a respectable community before you came. Here, Mrs. Whitman, burning down the clubhouse won't solve anything. You'll only hurt yourself and face more serious charges. I won't let you win. Patricia shouted back, I'll destroy this place before I let it become one of your neighborhoods. Marcus realized Patricia was beyond reason, but he kept her talking while the tactical team positioned themselves. For 20 tense minutes, she ranted about property values, community standards, and racial grievances that revealed the depth of her prejudice. The end came suddenly. Patricia, apparently realizing her situation was hopeless, made a desperate attempt to light the gasoline. The tactical team had been ready. They breached the building simultaneously from two entrances, tackling Patricia before she could ignite the accelerant. As paramedics checked Patricia for injuries and officers led her away in handcuffs, she screamed one final threat at Marcus. This isn't over. I have friends, connections. You'll never be safe here. But Patricia Whitman's threats proved empty. The investigation into her actions revealed a conspiracy that went deeper than anyone had imagined. Detective Sarah Martinez, who led the arson investigation, discovered that Patricia had been embezzling HOA funds for years, using the money to pay for legal fees in her discrimination campaigns. The false violation fine she'd imposed on Marcus and other minority residents had been financing her racist agenda. More shocking still, investigators found evidence that Patricia had been coordinating with similar HOA presidents in neighboring communities, sharing tactics for driving out minority residents through selective enforcement and legal harassment. 6 months later, Patricia Whitman was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison for civil rights violations, arson, conspiracy, embezzlement, and filing false police reports. The Lake Pine Estates HOA was dissolved and reformed under court supervision, with new leadership committed to fair and equal treatment of all residents. Marcus still lives peacefully at his lakefront cabin, now recognized as a hero by his neighbors for exposing years of systematic discrimination. His security cameras remain in place not because he fears Patricia Whitman, who will remain in federal prison for years to come, but because his case inspired other victims to come forward. The real twist: 3 other HOA presidents in nearby communities have been arrested based on Patricia's seized communications, revealing a network of discrimination that stretched across the entire county. Justice, it turned out, was even sweeter than the sunset. Views from Marcus's deck. Sometimes the badge finds you, even when you're just trying to enjoy your morning coffee in peace.